Welcome to our leadership webinar on General Conference. We're so excited to be having these webinars for the conference, and we know that not only people from that live here are watching it, but others who live in other places but are part of our conference as well. And so it's so good to be able to be connected. Our connectionalism here present as we learn, as we work together, and as we spend some time also reflecting and thinking about the future of our church. There will be a time of questions and answers, and I'm going to invite District Superintendent Matt to open us in prayer.
Thank you, Javier, and thank you everybody for joining us. Let's pray. Great Spirit, whose voice we hear in the winds, whose breath gives life to all the world, hear us. We come before you today as your children. In a season of uncertainty, we need your strength and wisdom. Let us walk in beauty and make our eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. May our hands respect the things you have made. May our ears be sharp to hear your voice. Would you make us wise so that we may know the things you have taught your people, the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. We seek strength not to be superior to our brothers and sisters, but to live in harmony with ourselves, with one another, with all of your creation. Help us to be adaptable to changing circumstances. Help us to trust ourselves and our futures and the church to you. Help us to be ever ready to come to you so that when life fades as a fading sunset, our spirits may come to you without shame. Thanks be to God. Amen.
Thank you, Matt. Our speaker today is Pastor Dan Hurlburt. And Dan is a graduate from Arizona State University. He went to Claremont School of Theology for his MDiv. And he's been in churches, he was a pastor in Prescott as an associate first. And then he was in first Tucson, and he was a campus minister of the U of A. He also served at Desert Skies, Tempe First, and Prescott United Methodist Church, which is where he's serving right now. Dan has a vast knowledge in our history and our doctrine. He's been chair of Boom. And also he's been a delegate for General Conference for 2016, and now he's a head delegate for 2020. And so he's just a person that's that I think knows the discipline well, and he's always reading and getting to the latest news of what is happening at General Conference. And I know there are some new developments that he will share with you. And I also have to mention that Dan is an avid Disney fan. And so I present to you Dan Hurlburt.
Thank you, Javier. I am Dan Hurlburt. I'm the senior pastor of Prescott United Methodist Church, and I'm coming to you from my living room. I'm going to share with you a bit about the structure of the church, how we work as either clergy or lay people within that structure at various levels, including General Conference, where we are right now, and how we got to this place, and what looks like is going to happen in the immediate future. I'm always hesitant to talk about the future. People were asking me a couple months ago, what's going to happen? And I came to the conclusion that that's like asking me who's going to win the Super Bowl next season. where, we haven't even started to play games yet. We don't know, who's with who. And it's some pretty advanced information, but with what's happened in the last couple of days, the picture has become more and more clear. So the first thing that I want to tell you is where to get information. So there are a lot of places to get information. Some of them are reliable and some of them are not reliable, or at least at the very least is they are biased. So the best news source is our as in United Methodist News.org. That is the church's official news service. And they post things daily on their website. You can go there and sign up to receive briefings, and you can sign up to get those briefings either as they occur or every Friday, and you yourself can stay updated. Our conference communications group does a really good job, so there's lots of information available on our conference website as well. There are lots of bloggers, and I don't recommend them because they are biased. So websites like Action, Juicy Ecumenism, People Need Jesus, and Ministry Matters are all coming from a biased perspective, and the information that they share, while perhaps accurate from the author's perspective, generally is biased. It's basically the equivalent of watching MSNBC or Fox News. You're not really getting a lot of actual information. You're getting a lot more opinion than you are news stories. So stick to the News, and particularly the stuff that's written by Heather Hahn regarding the future of the church, and you'll do pretty well there. So the church is structured in similar ways to the way that the government is structured. One of the reasons for that is that our church started in the U.S. in 1784, just around the same time that our government was starting. So the way that they're structured is very similar. We've got the three branches of governance with legislative, executive, and judicial, just like the government does. But then we have layers of structure too, much like the government does, just like you will have maybe a neighborhood group, and then a city group, and then there's county and state, and then federal government. We have our local churches have committees. They've got the church council, or in some cases, the one board structure plan. Then we have our districts. Then we have our annual conference, which according to the discipline is our basic unit. Beyond the annual conference, we have the jurisdiction in the US. There are 5 jurisdictions. We are part of the Western jurisdiction. In international places, that body is called a central conference. They don't have jurisdictions outside of the US, they have central conferences. And then we have the general conference, which and the general level of the church, which makes up the general conference itself, our general boards and agencies, and the council of bishops, and the judicial council. So those are basically the layers and forms of our governance. So every year, annual conference meets, and the annual conference makes decisions about the mission and ministry of the church. If you go to annual conference, sometimes it doesn't feel like we do as much of that as we should, but it really is that annual conference that sets the mission priority for our local churches. We want to focus on this area or that area, and then it's up to us in our local communities to find a way to deliver that message into the community that we serve. Our annual conference is housed within the Western jurisdiction, and the Western jurisdiction meets every 4 years, just like the general conference does. All of the jurisdictions in the US tend to meet at exactly the same time. And while they do some other forms of business, the most important things that jurisdictions do is that they elect and oversee our bishops. So it's oftentimes, I think it's part of our history that's overlooked, But I think that part of our the situation that we're in now is due to the way that our jurisdictions are structured and the power that they've been given. So you may know in your Methodist history that around the time of the Civil War, that the Methodist Episcopal Church split north and south, just like the country did. And that schism remained in the church until the late 1930s, when we decided to come back together. And the compromise that was reached at that time was to make jurisdictions. And it was really made out of racist motives. There were people in certain parts of the country that didn't want certain parts of leadership. And if you know the history, you know at that time what they called the central jurisdiction was created. And the central jurisdiction was not geographic like the others. It was a jurisdiction that housed all of the African-American churches, no matter where they were in the US. So they were segregated in that way. As the legislation was written to create the jurisdictions, it was decided that jurisdictions would have autonomy, that they would be able to elect and supervise their own bishops, which means that, you know, we might, out here in the West, we might get upset with something a bishop in the Southeast has said, and we can write letters and we can suggest that that bishop be reprimanded or receive other punitive action. But we really, other than that, we have no say in the matter. We don't, we can't put that person on trial, that kind of thing. Many people speculate that the reason that the system was created this way was because in certain parts of the country, they were deathly afraid that they would receive an African-American bishop, and they just didn't want that. You know, going into even recent decades, that was an issue. The West, while certainly we can't say that we're not racist people out here, but the West is almost always led the way in inclusion with our Episcopal elections, electing the first African-American woman. Bishop Galvan was the first bishop that had been born in Mexico to be elected. Bishop Carcaño was the first Mexican-American woman to be elected bishop. And Bishop Karen Oliveto was the first out lesbian to be elected bishop. So because of the jurisdictional autonomy, as folks got bent out of shape, particularly about Bishop Karen's election, there wasn't much they could do about that because all of the decisions lie within the jurisdiction. And the group that's in charge of that decided that they didn't want to toe the line as far as what the Book of Discipline says with regard to Bishop Karen, and she still remains in active service. So you got your jurisdictional level that does lots of things, but primarily they elect and oversee the work of the bishops. So then we come to the General Conference. The General Conference is made up of delegates from all around the world. We were scheduled in 2020 to have 862 delegates. Just like annual conference, there's to be an equal number of clergy delegates and lay delegates, and they are elected by their annual conferences. And if you've been through that process, you know that clergy vote for clergy and lay people vote for lay people. There are delegates that come from all over the world, including what they call concordant churches. So the Methodist Church in England, for example, is not United Methodist, but there's a Methodist church there. They send one, and they're considered concordant. They send one lay person and one clergy person that get to come to General Conference. So all told, we have churches and delegates that come from 17 different time zones. That's a lot. Yeah, we're on, I think, every continent except Antarctica. And we're asking Javier to start a church there, yeah, soon. So bundle up, Javier. So the General Conference comes together as a legislative body, and they're the ones that the only organization that can edit and make changes to the Book of Discipline. And so that's our primary job when we come together. The first part of the conference, the delegates are broken into legislative sections. In 2020, it was scheduled to have 16 different legislative sections. That's one more than we had in 2016. And they cover different paragraphs or sections of the Book of Discipline. There are 2 sections that deal with church and society. There's a discipleship section. There's a ministry section that deals primarily with Board of Ordained Ministry stuff. There's one that deals with issues of higher education. So 16 different legislative sections. In 2016, I was in the legislative section that dealt with ministry, higher education, and superintendency, which deals with superintendents and bishops. We had right around 120 pieces of legislation that we had to process in about 4 days. The way that we did that was we broke into 5 or 6 small groups that had about a dozen people each, and we got rid of well over half of our work that way. Just basically looked at stuff and said this isn't worth considering any further than us 12, and voted it out. And then the whole body came together and dealt with the remaining pieces. Those that are passed get sent into the full group, the General Conference, and they have to open them up and debate them and pass them or not that way. So generally the work that is done by General Conference is legislative. And there are other church publications that may come out of the General Conference being commissioned and vetted by them, such things as the hymnal and the Book of Worship. But the actual crafting of those books is left up to committees, and just the approval of the work happens in the General Conference. So I brought with me my 2016 book of legislation, just so I can show you a little bit of what it looks like. So that's it. This one is about 1,500 pages. And we read that all, didn't we, Javier? Yeah. So you read it all. I use a pretty complicated system. I have 3 highlighters, red, yellow, and green. And as I read it, if it's a definite no, it's red. If it's maybe okay, but I have these issues, it's yellow. And if I like it, it's green. The only problem with that is anybody sitting around me that looks over my shoulder, knows where I am with those things. But I thought about doing, blue and purple and, peach or something, but I didn't think I would ever be able to keep them straight in my head. So I want to talk to you now a little bit about what's happening right now and how we got to this place. So in 1972, the sexual revolution was well underway in the United States. And some folks thought it might be a good idea to have a statement about sexuality, human sexuality, in the Book of Discipline. And they wrote a statement that basically said, our sexuality is a gift from God, and that the church needed to make a statement to that effect. And so it went through that whole legislative committee process that I've just described, and it got to the floor of the General Conference. Human sexuality is a gift from God. And somebody stood up to amend it. And they said, we have some reservations, and we suggest that it says that human sexuality is a gift from God. However, the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. So as an amendment, that statement got put into our book in 50 years ago in 1972. And it's been there ever since. It's been changed. It's been added to. There have been more restrictive clauses around LGBTQ IA plus folks that have been added in. And there's been a constant effort to remove the language that has failed each time that has happened. In 2016, the debate had become, I don't know that it had become any worse, but it had certainly become the dominant theme, and the church was just stuck. And so it was decided that we would just cease talking about it, and a special session of General Conference would be held in 2019, and that we would try to find a way forward. And so they named the Way Forward Commission, and they came up with a handful of different plans. And as those plans were made public, groups that were for what they would call reform and renewal within the church said, wait a second, what we prefer is not in here. And we happen to have something. And so they offered that forward, and that became known as the traditional plan. I just think it's important to note that the commission that was actually appointed to come up with a way forward did not come up with the traditional plan. So I just as an aside here, I never like using us and them type language. I believe that the body of Christ is diverse and has many members, and that we're all one in that body. And so to refer to people as other is just contrary to my nature. But I've also discovered over the years that sometimes we have to use shorthand to get to where we are. So to other people that are in WCA or the Reform and Renewal Coalition, it's not my intent to say that they're not a part of the body of Christ, and not people that I consider to be my siblings in this effort. But I will use the term they in referring to those organizations from time to time. So those organizations came up with the traditional plan. So we went to St. Louis in 2019. It was like 3 years ago last week that happened. My Facebook memories were full of pictures that I was in from St. Louis. It was a difficult time because we did the legislation in a very different way. Instead of breaking into our subgroups, we formed one single legislative committee out of the 800 plus delegates that were there. And, we had a circus in that environment. And there was lots of strategy on both sides of the issue. But at the end of the day, the traditional plan passed by a fairly slim margin, not like 20 or 30 people, but it was a pretty small majority, which is significant for the place that we are in now. One of the things that happened that was interesting was that a strategy of those opposing the traditional plan was to not let the plan be amended, just to have it go, if it was going to go forward, and it was obvious that it was, that it would go forward in a broken state, which it did. And several pieces of it, after it passed, were declared unconstitutional by the Judicial Council, and so therefore they could not be they could not be enforced in the book. So that happened. 2019 happened, and really before even the conference adjourned, there was pushback. The Western jurisdiction, and I stood in support of this statement. One of our leaders from Portland area got up to the microphone and said, "Hey, we're going to keep doing things as we've always done them here in the West. We're going to be a church for all people, and basically, we don't care what the rest of you think about that." And we sort of move forward from there. So at this point, it's this is where the margin of victory for the traditional plan becomes a germane issue. One of my friends who's a lot more political savvy than I am said to me, "Dan, this is probably the worst possible outcome for the Reform and Renewal folks, because they won, but they didn't get a large enough margin that it's a mandate. So it wasn't like an overwhelming majority." Like I remember when Ronald Reagan beat Walter Mondale. I think Mondale carried one, maybe two states. And, Reagan was able to say, "Oh, I have a mandate," because it's such a huge, huge majority. But this thing just, really just kind of squeaked through. And there was so much tension around it that it became pretty clear that it was going to be super hard to enforce it, particularly here in the United States. So the next thing that happened almost immediately was that the more progressive folk and the more traditional folk came together with a guy who is a world famous negotiator by the name of Feinberg. And Mr. Feinberg had negotiated like the September 11th victims settlements and other very high profile situations. So this was a group of, I think, somewhere between 16 and 20 people. And they negotiated with one another, and they came up with a large legislative package called the Protocol for Separation Through Grace and something else. Its shorthand is the Protocol. And they started to push a lot, put a lot of energy behind that. Basically, the protocol would allow for churches that wanted to be more traditional to leave, folks that were in the Reform and Renewal Coalition, and also folks that were even further on the left than the church appeared to be willing to go, allowed them to leave as well. And there was also provisions in there for both of those groups to take some money with them. The Reform and Renewal group would get $25 million, and the other group, would like to call themselves the Liberationists, they would take $2 million. So in January of 2020, I attended the briefing for General Conference that was scheduled to happen in May of that year. And the protocol was presented, and I met with other leaders from the West, and we began to strategize around it. And we pretty much to a person decided that it wasn't really comfortable, but it was probably the best thing. And so we were all prepared to move in the direction of the protocol. And then we all went home, and something happened in like February, March of 2020. I can't remember quite what it was. The COVID pandemic hit, and it changed everything for the way that we do ministry. And then that year, in around Easter time, there was a single car accident in Sierra Leone, and the occupant of that car was Bishop John Yambasu. And Bishop Yambasu was the president of that African College of Bishops. And he was the lone African member on the negotiating team for the protocol. And while Bishop Yambasu had assured everybody that the bishops in Africa would fall in line and bring their delegations along with them with regard to the protocol, once he died, a lot of that felt like it went out the window. Then a while later, one of our, I believe he was a secretary with the General Board of Discipleship, Junius Dodson, who was also a major figure in the development of the protocol. He passed away from cancer. And it really began to look like those that had negotiated the protocol were no longer even in favor of it. So as time went by and it became clear that we weren't going to be able to meet in 2020, churches began to exercise a piece of legislation that had been passed in 2019 that enabled an annual conference to give a church permission to separate through some financial payment and some other rigmarole there. To date, about 130 churches have left the connection via this paragraph. That doesn't feel like a whole lot because it's like 1%, but it's also right around the size of our own annual conference. So if you think about, we've lost a chunk around the size of Desert Southwest, it comes home for us. So as those churches started to leave, and the makeup of the elections for the 2020 delegations to General Conference tend to lean more center-left, particularly in the US. People that had held seats for years and years didn't win their elections, and replacing them were more people to the center and the left. It began to look like the hopes for the protocol were sort of touch and go. So with the pandemic, the Commission on General Conference, who's the only group that can decide when the group is going to meet, they rescheduled it, and then they postponed it, and they rescheduled it again for beginning August 29 of this year. And just on Thursday afternoon, they announced their decision that it is further postponed now until 2024 in May at a location to be announced. So the use of the word postpone is interesting for two reasons. One is that they don't have the power to cancel it on their own, but they do have the power to postpone it. So people say, why don't they just say, we're just going to skip 2020 and we'll have a new one in 2024? The answer to that question is they couldn't do that. So they've postponed it. So now there is a question as to, since it's not a new meeting of the General Conference, but a postponed meeting of 2020, do we elect new people, or do the people that were elected to go in 2020 go? And nobody knows the answer to that question. It's going to go to the church's Supreme Court, the Judicial Council, for a ruling. So in the meantime, the Reform and Renewal Coalition, which is made up of groups, the Wesley Covenant Association, the Good News, the Action, which is part of the Institute of Religion and Democracy, Life Watch. There may be one or two other groups that make up Reform and Renewal. They have announced that they will be launching a new Methodist expression called the Global Methodist Church, and their official launch is May 1st. And they've invited like-minded folks to go with them, but have also expressed through a email that they accidentally released early, that they are also willing to remain supportive of traditionalist congregations that want to stay in the United Methodist Church and continue to agitate for their causes. So that was a lot. And I think I'll pause now to rest my voice and take any questions that you might have.
It says in 1844, General Conference created a plan for separation that had to be approved by three-fourths of annual conferences. 1845, the Methodist Episcopal Church South withdrew, but annual conferences ultimately did not approve the plan of separation, leading to the Supreme Court's interference in a case. How is the preemptive withdrawal by the conservatives forming the Global Methodist Church before the plan is officially approved any different? Or are we going to enter a decade of legal wrangling over property and funds again?
So that's a deep question, and I don't know that I can accurately answer all of the detail with that, but I would say that the easiest answer is that those pieces of legislation that got passed in 2019 that have to do with separation made it easier for churches that feel like they have to leave to be able to do that. The question around the legal wrangling, I think, depends a lot on the will of annual conferences. So the way that it works is, let's say the church in Winkleman decides that they're going to go. We don't have a church in Winkleman, right? But say they decide that they're going to go. So they have to have like a 2/3 charge conference vote that we're going. And then they negotiate with the annual conference via the trustees around things like, are they current with their apportionments? What's their past service obligation with regard to the pension fund? And are there any other encumbrances, like maybe the annual conference paid for a new roof on the church or helped them buy a parking lot or something like that? So are they encumbered in some other way that they really should be paying back to the conference? So they negotiate a number, a financial settlement, pay that money, and then they're able to go. So
there's one more vote at annual conference.
The annual conference has to vote. Exactly. Thank you, Susan. So you could see how if an annual conference wanted to be nasty about it, they could say, well, we feel like you owe an exorbitant amount of money. So there are some that would claim that that's what's going on. Others are predicting that's what's going to happen. But that remains to be seen. So others are saying, oh no, this is going to be gracious. And, if they're going to go. I would kind of answer Ron there by, if somebody doesn't want to stay, how are you going to make them stay? We're going to end up with a lot of empty buildings on our hands if that were the case, denominationally speaking, not necessarily in our conference.
Since the Global Methodist Church has already announced a May date, is all of this conversation moot?
I don't think it's moot. And I hadn't really thought this through till the Good News accidentally released their email prematurely. And I saw that last paragraph in there that said, we're willing to support those that want to remain in the denomination and continue to agitate for change. So it appears that, we're still going to be fighting over the LGBTQ inclusion to some degree.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The last question I see right now is in 2021, I heard that there would be a written voting by General Conference delegates on certain housekeeping measures. Did that happen?
I think that this person is referring to a called special session that was called in 2021. So what happened with that was the Council of Bishops called a special session in 2021. I think they announced it around February of last year. They sent out to us 15 pieces of legislation that were, housekeeping is a pretty good term for what they were. They were basically the equivalent of a continuing resolution that would be in the Congress, where we're not sure how we're going to go forward because we don't have a budget, that type of thing. And so the call for the session basically said, we will deal with these 15 items, no more, no less. They're not up for debate or discussion and cannot be amended. The legislative body was just to vote up or down on them. There was a little bit of pushback around that because that's not why legislators get elected, not to just rubber stamp somebody else's legislation. So the Council of Bishops rescinded the call for that special conference, and it did not happen.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun, that particular chapter. Is
there a group, Global Methodist Church, that are leaving? Is that a done deal?
I don't know if they're leaving or not. I've never gotten, I remember just kind of asking Bishop Bob point blank at one point, do you know of anybody that's going? And he said something like, oh, there might be one or two. You know, so I know that we lost the church in Camp Verde, which is, you know, just on the other side of the mountain from me, over similar issues. So, but that's been, you know, that's been going on for a few years. So I don't know if there's anybody that's planning to go, whole churches or individual members, but we'll see. So am I saying that the traditionalists are leaving? Not in our conference, but they certainly are going in other places.
Dan, could you please share who are the delegates of our conference, general conference delegate?
So we only have 2 general conference delegates. We have one clergy person, that's me, and one lay person who is Paul Gomez. Paul is a young adult, preacher's kid, and he lives in the Phoenix area. And Paul works for United Methodist Communications, doing outreach to young adults. Paul has been a great asset on the team because he is well connected and often has really good information. We, when it comes to jurisdictional conference, we get to send 5 of each to that. And so all of the general conference delegates are considered reserve delegates to general conference or alternates. So on the clergy side, in order of election, it's Anthony Tang, Beth Rambicure, Didi Arikakath, Javier, and Timote Piakula. On the lay side, it is Julie O'Neill, Trinity Donovan, Carla Whitmire, Jess Brown, and Matthew Harris. We've had people resign since we held our elections in 2019. We've had a couple people that have dropped out. One moved away and one just lost interest.
Other questions. There's a lot about people, politics, and power. I'm wondering where Christ is in all of this. What do Christ's teachings say about a path to follow, and what a person or group proposes to speak for Christ?
Right. So I'm reminded of the famous Elie Wiesel story where he's in the concentration camp and he's watching a young person that's being executed, and the execution does not go well, and the person is suffering. And someone says, "Where is God?" And Elie Wiesel's comment is, "God is on the gallows." So where is Christ? He's probably on the cross over this being killed again. over what we are doing to one another.
The next question, will churches that join the Global Methodist Church keep their building if it is paid off?
So I don't think whether or not it's free and clear mortgage wise is a factor. There's one case of a church that left. I don't know. I can't. It was somewhere in the southeast. I can't read. I want to say it was Mississippi, but it might have been Georgia. Their annual conference just kind of let them walk, and part of the reason was that they owed more money on their buildings and grounds than the conference thought it was worth. So whether or not your property is encumbered with some bank isn't really much of a factor. I will only be a part of that decision-making process as a voting member of the annual conference. I thought I said Jess Brown. Didn't I say Jess Brown?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You did.
She's moved up into the jurisdictional voting pool now because of a resignation above her.
Okay.
So that distracted me. I forgot where I was.
So you were, I think, talking about can a church leave with its building, but you had already named the three things that needed to happen.
Yeah, it would be, you know, the negotiation there with like the cabinet and conference trustees that would make that call. And again, I think you know, most of our cabinet is gracious, you know.
Yeah.
I think that when they came to that, but at the same time, if somebody owes a lot of money, like the church that I was at in Tucson, while they had paid for their buildings, the annual conference at that time, this was, you know, several years ago, bought 10 acres for $150,000. Imagine that today, right? And you know, I would imagine that church would be asked to at least pay that money back. It you know, technically not on a mortgage anywhere, but it's only fair that the resource be kicked back. If it was, I would also say it would be within the conference's decision-making ability to say, you know, this land was, you know, purchased in church I'm in 1870. It might be worth a little bit more money today than it was in 1870. So, you know, to get off the hook, we really don't want to abandon Prescott for United Methodism. We're going to need enough money to plant a new church up there. So that type of thing would be within the decision-making ability of the groups that will negotiate that. Fortunately, that's not me.
All right. The United Methodist Church has been very protective of the cross and flame emblem. If a church withdraws, do they give up use of the symbol?
Yes, they do. That the cross and flame is administered by the General Council on Finance and Administration, and they have been known to write people when they have been cease and desist when they've been using it improperly. So I would think that would, you know, if there was a church that we have a very prominent one on the side of our building, and if we were to go in the other direction, I imagine that we would receive word that needed to come down fairly soon.
Thank you. Without a valid protocol, will there be some standardization undertaken, or will it be all over the place for leaving?
It will vary by annual conference. So, and in some degrees from church to church, depending on their level of financial encumbrance. But it, you know, there are going to be some conferences that I think will make it fairly easy for people to go, and others that might make it slightly more difficult.
Thank you. Will the open doors, open hearts, open minds statement continue to be used?
So that's a 21-year-old ad campaign now. I remember when it came out because I was in campus ministry, and like most other people, I really loved it. They actually have a new campaign that I got to be in a sort of a beta test group on a couple of weeks ago. That's called B, as in BEUMC, and it looks very similar to Open Hearts, Open Minds, Open Doors, but it's a different slogan. But I think that certainly you can still use Open Hearts, Open Minds, Open Doors. It's owned by the United Methodist Church, and I don't think anybody's going to be terribly upset, but I would look into the BUMC stuff, which is available at UMCOM.
And Julie's put the link in our chat if someone wants to copy it and
Okay, yeah.
connect to it. Dan, it looks like that's all the questions we have right now.
Okay, so I did want to talk a little bit about why I intend to stay in the United Methodist Church. I'm a cradle Methodist. The church that I grew up in, both sets of my grandparents were in attendance every week, and one set of my great grandparents were there. My parents met one another in the youth group there, and it's been my spiritual home. Baptized as an infant with one of my cousins was baptized on the same day. So church has always been family to me in a very meaningful way, and it is the place where I found my calling, and I don't feel like turning my back on it. But it's more important than the Creighton United Methodist Church where I grew up, which is now known as the Bridge. In 1969, I was 4 years old, and I went with a family camp up to Camp Mingus. Now, in 1969, Mingus was a little bit different. They were still building the mountain then, plates were shifting. And I remember one of the work groups was stenciling on the wooden tables for the dining hall, the Cross and Flame, which I was fascinated because I'd never seen a stencil before. But I know now that it was because it was 1969 and the symbol had just been adopted the year prior. I would go to Camp Mingus as a camper, and in junior high, it's the place where Julie O'Neill's dad, Jim, offered us the opportunity to invite Jesus into our hearts. And I did that for the first time there at Camp Mingus, and have had to do it many days since, sometimes more than once a day. And I just hate the notion of leaving behind Camp Mingus. It is such an important place, and it continues to be an important place, and do the same thing. As I got older, the Wesley Foundation at Arizona State became important to me. Jane Tews was one of my campus ministers. Gary Kennedy was one of my campus ministers. I think of the work that we do locally in UMOM, TMM, and UMSOM in Vegas, Wesley Community Center in Phoenix. All of the lives that we have changed because we have been connected through these years. We currently can give to UMCOR and help people in Ukraine and those fleeing Ukraine. And we leave. We're no longer a part of that system. Now, I'm also reminded that at the very beginning of the Methodist movement, those that were traditionalists in the day, they were not fans of John Wesley. John Wesley was bringing all the wrong sorts of people into the church. The great unwashed, the regular pew sitters called them, but they were people like you and me. They were coal miners and other manual laborers and other such undesirables. As the church developed in the newly formed United States, the people who tend to not like it were those that held slaves and other folks that were oppressive. So our church has always been about making the right people a little bit uncomfortable by welcoming in those who were considered to be the wrong people. Being a Methodist is always been about that. And there have always been those who were uncomfortable with that part of our mission and ministry. And there probably always will be. When I look at the balance of the scales in my own life and ministry, all of the things that I would be leaving behind should I choose to leave the church of my childhood, it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it. So I choose to continue in the United Methodist Connection, as broken as it may be, as short as we fall, as terrible as our arguments are, because this is the place where I first met Christ and the place where I believe Christ is still in ministry among us. So that's about all I have to say about that. I appreciate you listening to this. If you have questions, you can email me, Pastor Dan at PrescottUMC.com is my favorite way for people to reach out to me. And I'll be happy to answer any questions or have a personal discussion with you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for your very knowledgeable explanation of what's going on right now, and where things may be going. Even if you can't predict the Super Bowl, that would have been an interesting gift for you to offer us. We thank you for your witness, why you are a United Methodist and will always continue to be. We appreciate your wisdom and your leadership in all of this.
I think a couple of our lay delegates are here. And Paul Gomez, as Dan was sharing. Paul, you just want to say a word of greeting? I know you're logging in from Tennessee or wherever you are.
Yeah, good morning, friends. Great to be with y'all. And it was great to listen to Dan's testimony and witness to what this work looks like and how it's been changing over the last 4 years of doing it for the General Conference of 2020 blank. But we finally have a goal to hit, and we'll just keep working and taking whatever we can with the next batch of legislation and all the new challenges that are going to come with us. So appreciate the opportunity to be here and just enjoy all of the energy that you have in your questions. Looking forward to the future. Thank you.
Also, Julie O'Neill, just say a word of greeting, Julie.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here with you, and just so glad that you continue to be interested in the things of the church that are beyond our local church, but certainly have an impact.
You know, those words that Dan said at the end about why he wants to remain a United Methodist or remain with the United Methodist Church is very powerful, and I'm sure it resonates with many of you. So with that, let us close in prayer. Gracious God, you have called us to be serving in the United Methodist Church. And to some you called from when they were a young child. And I'm talking about clergy, I'm talking about laity. You have all called us to serve somewhere in some ministry at some place. And we give you thanks for that call. We give you thanks for the places we have served, for the people that have mentored us, for the pastors that we have had and that have been instrumental to our upbringing, to our faith, to see the world differently. We also mourn for the people we have lost, for the people not only that are not here with us on this earth, but have moved to other denominations, or perhaps to without a church. Gracious God, we pray for ourselves and for those who will be part of our beloved United Methodist Church. In the prayer of Mark Stam, O God of ages, who called Abraham and Sarah to journey to a land that you promised, guide the people called United Methodist through our current distress to a place of peace and rekindled vision, that we may yet participate in the transformation of the world, and that our neighbors may find in us generous friends through Jesus Christ, the Good Shepherd, who with you and the Holy Spirit lives and reigns, one God now and forever. Amen.